Coming up on this week's episode of TechSNAP, a MySQL flaw so bad I just simply had to laugh, and a simple SSH configuration mistake that led to a really bad day. Plus, we've got some questions from the audience, and we'll supply the answers. All that and more coming up on this week's episode of TechSNAP. Hi everyone, and welcome to TechSNAP. This is episode 62 of Jupiter Broadcasting's weekly systems network and administration podcast. We streamed this episode live on June 14th, 2012. This episode is brought to you by GoDaddy.com, and I'll tell you more about them as the show goes on. And the live stream is epically powered by the always scalable ScaleEngine.com. My name is Chris, and joining us every single week is our host, the tech, the admin, and the teacher, Alan Jude. Hey there, Alan.
Hey, Chris. Everybody, thanks for watching.
Hey, man. Happy episode 62 to you. 62 in a row. You got to love it.
Yes.
Got a big show this week. Oh, what? I know. Weird. I would say that, right? That's strange. But it's at the beginning of the day, Alan starts out, he's filling out the show doc notes and things like that. In the top, I see, MySQL bypassing. Okay, that's interesting. And it's just one line he has in there about the notes. I'm like, well, that's probably just a quick mention. But no, there's actually quite a bit of info in there. And there's
actually, if you look at the show notes now, it consumes an entire page at the regular font size.
So I was like, whoa, okay. Much bigger topic than I was expecting. But we're not just stopping there. There's been a story that we've actually, has it been 2 weeks we've been holding on to one of these stories, just trying to finally be able to fit it in. So we're going to get to that. Yeah, and then we're going to get to that one today. Plus, we've got a rockin' roundup and some great Q&A that's come in, including some follow-up to some stuff we've covered before. Before we go to that, there's a few things I want to warn you about. Father's Day is this weekend. So if you are a live viewer of the Linux Action Show, check jupiterbroadcasting.com/calendar regularly this weekend, because I'm not sure yet if it'll be live on Sunday. I'm still waiting to see... I'm waiting to figure out which co-host I'm going to have and then when they're available. So that's all still being worked out. So just check over at jupiterbroadcasting.com/calendar, because it might not be on Sunday to make room for Father's Day. Also, if you would like to support TechSNAP and the other shows on the network, and you haven't bought your Father's Day gift yet, consider using one of our affiliate links down at the bottom of jupiterbroadcasting.com for Amazon US, UK. I've gotten a few requests actually for Amazon Canada.
Yep.
And so I got to look into that. I got to figure out how to make that work. It's more challenging because they'll only issue payment in certain kinds of cards. But regardless, I'll look into it.
You get Amazon gift cards.
Yeah. But if you scroll all the way down...
you buy enough on Amazon, you'll be able to use them anyway, right?
Yeah. Oh, boy. Don't. Trust me. I live off Amazon. And if you do too, just consider using our Amazon link. We've also got links down there for ThinkGeek, Best Buy, Newegg, Audible.com, Gamefly, and then a Chrome extension. If you grab that Chrome extension, it just handles all of that affiliate stuff for you when you browse those sites. So thank you to everyone who supports these shows. Alan, should we jump into our first news story?
Sure.
All right, sir. Lay this MySQL story upon us. What's happening here?
Yes. The people at Rapid7, which is a company that makes Metasploit, titled it a tragically comedic security flaw in MySQL.
Ouch.
So basically, it's a MySQL authentication bypass, which basically means you can access MySQL without having to have a username and password.
Lovely.
So basically, the developers of MariaDB, which is a fork of MySQL, mostly started since Oracle is evil, recently found a flaw in MySQL, and actually, because they were working on their own stuff, they were building some unit tests and found that in their unit tests, if they tried enough times, they could log in as root with the wrong password. So once they dug into the code, they found the flaw, and the flaw basically gives attackers a 1 in 256 chance to log into the MySQL server with the incorrect password.
You're S-ing me. I mean, could you imagine an unprotected box on the internet just getting scanned by scripts that could take advantage of that? You can hit that in minutes.
Well,
Am I misunderstanding?
You can try 1,000 times, probably in 1 or 2 seconds. If you try 1,000 times, your chance of succeeding is 98%.
That's incredible. This is bad.
Yes. So it affects all MariaDB and MySQL versions up to 5.1.63, 5.2.11, 5.3.5, and 5.5.22.
Oh, man. Wow.
Yeah. the exploit is even a bit worse than it sounds because, so with the exploit, basically the way it works is when you log into MySQL, the way it checks to see if you're if it's the right password is it takes the SHA-1 hash of the password and some random data, right? And that's and passes that back and forth. The issue is with the way it compares the two hashes, the correct one and the attempted one. It's using memcmp, which is a C function that compares two different memory addresses to see if they're the same. But basically, the code makes some assumptions about the return value. And different OSs and different compilers implement memcmp a little bit differently.
Go figure.
And so basically, sometimes it can return, because it expects the return value is an int, but the MySQL code was casting it as a character and then into a Boolean. So basically, under certain circumstances, it could think that memcmp returns 0, which means the two strings are identical, when they actually weren't. So because of that, basically, there's a 1 in 256 chance that two hashes that aren't the same will look like they are the same.
But does that also depend on which... Because you said since different operating systems implement that memory comparison differently, so some operating systems, maybe are they not vulnerable to it if they do it differently than others?
Right. So sometimes on some systems it's not vulnerable. So we get, but the reason the exploit is so bad is because even like right now I can log in somebody's MySQL server as root, but if once they patch, I wouldn't be able to log in as root anymore. The thing is, if I log in as root or even any regular user, because somebody could just delete the root account or something to try to avoid this.
Yeah, I suppose.
Right, if you give super privileges to some other user, it's the same root anyway. The issue is they could dump the MySQL user table, which has all the usernames and their password hashes. Well, if you dump that, then you can do an offline attack with something like John the Ripper.
You can take as long as you want. You have it.
Yeah, you take as long as you want, and then you have the username and password for legitimate accounts on that database. So you can come back later with real usernames and passwords.
See, this is, I think, when you hear about companies who have their username and password leaked and they don't realize it for a while, is probably people do this exact thing. They take it, and it's not like they're sitting on the server chewing away at it. So, no, they go offline, so they're undetectable once they're gone, and they can just sit there and they can just start logging in as legitimate people, and to the system, it looks totally normal.
This is what we postulated happened with the attack against Cryptic Studios.
Exactly.
Remember that? They were attacked in 2010, but no accounts started being compromised until 2012 because it took them a while to crack all the passwords. And they knew that they were going to be noticed once they started using the cracked passwords.
Right.
So they saved up a whole bunch of them and used them all at once rather than waiting. Or instead of waiting rather than using them all at once or as they were cracked. But basically, yeah, this means that someone could get the user table and then have real privileges later on. Actually, Metasploit has a module for this built in for dumping the MySQL database into the loot and cracking it later.
I love Metasploit.
And someone has actually made a multi-threaded brute force attacker for this exploit, where you just point it at a MySQL server and it uses a lot of threads to try to log in all at once, so you can get into a server in a couple of seconds. Right? You can try the 1,000 times it would take to guarantee success in a couple of seconds.
Gosh, you know what would be fun? Maybe this would be a Linux Action Show segment or something, but to set up a box and then try to do a few attacks against it. It's just, to do it right, it's not a quick process to do on camera, so you'd have to chop it down.
Right.
It'd be a fun segment.
And that's where something like the distribution we talked about before, Metasploitable, which is a Linux virtual machine specifically designed to have a bunch of open exploits on it so that you can try Metasploit against it and learn how to use it.
That's a fun idea. So, and what a great way you could work with Metasploitable and Backtrack Linux. So Backtrack Linux to do the attack and Metasploitable to be the victim. That's a fun segment.
Well, the Metasploitable is designed to be used against Metasploit against it, but yeah, same idea.
Well, Backtrack has Metasploitable.
Yeah, learning how to hack episode a couple of weeks ago. If you're interested in actually going through the process of using Metasploitable, go back a couple episodes for the learning how to hack episode.
Right. There you have it.
But in particular, the problem seems to stem actually, or deciding what's vulnerable and what's not seems to depend on if they used the SSE4 optimized version of memcmp. Which is used by a lot of the custom compiled MySQL on 64-bit OSs.
Okay.
So from the people at Rapid7, from their unofficial poll of virtual machines they tried against, real machines they tried against, and Twitter, vulnerable versions include Ubuntu Linux 64-bit from 10.04, 10.10, 11.04, 11.10, 12.04, etc.
Oh, the latest.
OpenSUSE 12.1, Debian Unstable, and maybe other versions. Fedora, they don't specify what version, but probably most versions. And Arch Linux, some versions, maybe not all.
Unspecified, yeah.
Yeah. Again, some of the data is unscientific poll from Twitter, so it doesn't have all the details.
Well, I mean, so let's see what you're talking about here. You're talking about CentOS, Red Hat Enterprise.
Well, not vulnerable includes any official MySQL.com, because I'm pretty sure they use the Intel C compiler rather than GCC. So MySQL, the binary that they release, and the one they do for Windows are not vulnerable. Red Hat Enterprise Linux 4, 5, and 6, and CentOS, if you use the official Red Hat Enterprise Linux RPMs, are not vulnerable. Ubuntu Linux, all the same versions, 32-bit, are not vulnerable because they don't use that. They use the built-in GCC memcmp rather than the SSE4 optimized one. And all versions of FreeBSD are not vulnerable, as far as we know. So a lot of that has to do with
unfortunately,
MySQL is compiled and so on.
The big heavy hitter here is Ubuntu. As far as like more consumer grade server deployments, is Ubuntu 10.04 and 12.04 have a pretty significant deployment, and of course so does Arch. But just in terms of things that typically run on servers, Debian Unstable isn't too common to find on a server.
Right.
Yeah. So interesting. That's a pretty significant list, though. But of course, Alan's favorite, FreeBSD, is not on the vulnerable list.
But basically, there's a patch now for MySQL, and the new versions. You should upgrade even if you're on a system that doesn't seem to be vulnerable.
Oh yeah, yep.
And the problem isn't actually SSE4. It's just that when you use the SSE4 optimized memcmp, it can return a value bigger than what MySQL assumed it would be. Basically, the MySQL code assumes it'll be between negative 127 and 128. Mm-hmm. And with the memcmp, it could be a bigger number. And so MySQL only looks at the last byte of it. And if that happens to be a 0, which can happen 1 in 256 times, then it thinks that the strings were the same when they're not.
Huh. Well, all right. Should we jump on to the next story?
I have a link to the Rapid7 blog where they have their compiled list. They have even more detail about it, and also some mitigation steps and best practices and so on. This wouldn't be exploitable if no one has access to your MySQL server. Right.
If your MySQL server only talks to 127.0.0.1, for example.
Right, but then it also depends on if other people have... if someone has shell access to your server for something, they could still do this. Right?
Yeah.
So especially shared web hosting is going to be a big target for this. The big providers will upgrade quite quickly, but a lot of these small, barely know what they're doing providers, this could be an issue for a while now. Luckily, most of them probably run CentOS, and so as long as they're using the official ones, but if they compile their own MySQL, possibly vulnerable.
Or if they're using Fedora or something like that.
Yep.
Huh. All right. Any other thoughts on that one?
Just the SSE4 optimized version of memcmp is 3 to 5 times faster, and that's why it's used. Mm-hmm. But there's nothing wrong with it. There's no bug in it. It's just the way MySQL interpreted the result that was wrong.
Right.
Basically, they were casting an int into a bool when they shouldn't have been. Also, in the show notes, I have a one-liner you can use to try to log into your SQL server 1,000 times and see if it works. Nice. It only takes a couple of seconds, and if it works, then you should be afraid. If it works, it probably means someone beat you to it.
Oh, no, yeah. All right, so go check that out. That's in the show notes.
And then I have links to the manual pages for the memcmp, and it kind of describes what it does, and you can see how the BSD version describes it slightly differently.
Oh, okay. All right, Alan. So any other thoughts on that one?
That's about it for that one, but it'll be time to upgrade your MySQL.
Yeah.
I think most all the distros already have a fix out because
oh, yeah.
I think the newer version of MySQL that had the fix for this has been out for a couple of weeks before the vulnerability was disclosed.
Okay.
Although that led to a little bit of concern based on the fact that anybody reading the diffs of what the change in the code might have been able to figure out what the exploit was before anybody else was officially notified.
I think I hear some sort of closed source enthusiast snickering at that for some reason. Because, the change logs are public.
Specifically, this is Oracle, so...
I do kind of like to snicker at Oracle, although I'm not a skeptic. All right, so why don't we talk about one small little SSH configuration goof that led to a real bad day?
So basically, this is an authentication bypass for F5 load balancers.
Yeah.
So the F5 makes load balancers that basically they sit in front of your web servers or database servers or whatever servers and balance the load across a bunch of physical servers or virtual servers or whatever.
They're pretty hefty. I mean, we're talking these can be a significant investment.
Yes, they're quite expensive. Usually have big support contracts. Handle lots of packets per second. Do things like SSL offloading and a bunch of other stuff like that.
Yeah, they can do cards where you can have dedicated hardware accelerator cards, so that way things like VPNs and encrypted connections are offloaded to these dedicated components, and these components themselves can be like $12,000 just for the card and things like that.
Right, but it's basically a processor that just sits there and does
incredible
SSL,
math. Yeah, math all the time.
Basically, it's a crypto chip instead of a general CPU, so it's better at crypto.
Yeah.
Anyway, they've fixed in a recently released security patch of it's not a bug or a flaw. It was just a mistake where the default configuration of every F5 included basically an SSH key for root.
Okay.
Right. So on the list of authorized keys, there was the RSA public key to allow someone to log in as root. That's pretty standard, except that the RSA private key that corresponds to that was also included on every single F5.
Oh.
The same key.
So they published the public and private on together, essentially?
Yeah, basically it was part of the OS that was on the F5. F5s run Linux.
Yeah.
So basically, as part of their distro, they included the public-private key pair for root. So that means every single F5 has root access to every single other F5. Or more importantly, anyone who has access to an F5 or knows someone who has an F5 can copy this key and post it online. So now you have to assume everybody on the entire internet has the root SSH key for every F5.
Wow. I agree with the chat room. Total facepalm moment. I mean... Wow. When I saw that it was an SSH config op that went awry, I was like, I wonder what they did, like allow root logins, and now they're exploiting that, something like that. But see, the problem with this...
The question is, why did they allow root logins at all?
Yeah, and the problem with this is now you have one uniform attack vector across every device.
Yep.
That is, and that if you get that, if you can grab that, that's the keys. You're in.
Well, because more importantly, it's like because it's an embedded application, a lot of admins and so on don't realize that it's running Linux, maybe, or if they have Linux servers, they have a system in place for getting the vulnerability announcements from Red Hat or whatever and solving.
Mm-hmm.
But they probably don't have their F5 on the same list.
Right.
They treat it as appliance rather than a server.
Well, it's because that's the F5 responsibility. The company, they are the ones that the F5 solutions are supposed to provide the updates and the firmware images and things like that. You don't go out and RPM update on your young UEM update.
Do you update your F5 load balancer? It's like if it's working fine, You normally
No.
don't want to touch it.
No, because it's such a process to get the new image, to get it deployed on there, and it's like, no, it's working just fine now. I wouldn't change it. And you're right, you don't think of it as like an operating system that might be running Apache and
you don't think to update it on a regular basis.
no, just like I don't think to update really my router either.
Yeah, basically, it's it's kind of like firmware, except for it's actually Linux. And yes, the other thing is it would require downtime. So unless you have a bunch of F5s in a high availability setup, then you're going to have downtime to fix this.
Yeah, it's specifically too because
there's some mitigation steps where you can just remove the key from the authorized key list.
yeah, sure.
But the other thing is the only way to tell that this has been used against you, it would be to look at var log secure and see if anybody's logged in as root. Except you can't tell if they used a password, a legit key, or this default key.
See, this is a difficult spot because like Stefan, I don't know, Counter is saying in the chat room that if you don't update, they'll say, well, sorry, you're not on the latest release. We're not providing you support. So the people can get way behind on this stuff too because people don't update.
And then, if you don't update for too long, they won't provide an upgrade path where you can actually update anymore. It's like, oh, we don't offer that old update anymore, and you need to do each step one at a time. So you just can't update anymore.
It's something that it goes back to one of the fundamental things you have to think about in your original design, because you need to design it so that way traffic can be routed around something that's going to need to be brought down from time to time for maintenance. Yep. Because these types of appliances are put in place in front of generally high load important systems, and if you turn them off, the traffic doesn't get to those systems. So if you don't design the system to be able to route around them, you get really stuck when it comes time to do an important update.
A high availability setup where you're like, having multiple of these. But if the cheapest F5 is $50,000, it can be hard to justify having 3 of them just in case. Exactly.
Interesting. Well, any other thoughts on that one?
Mostly just that why is root allowed to log in at all, and what kind of amateurs set up these key things and leave the private keys on there.
I hear that, yeah.
Basically, this is it. It seems reminiscent of the one we talked about a couple of weeks ago with the Chrome extension from Yahoo, where they accidentally left their keys in the version they sent out to everybody.
Right. Yeah, the Onyx. No, I can't even remember what the name of that thing was now. Boy, that just flared out, didn't it?
Axis or something?
Axis. No. Yeah, it was Axis, and I was like, really? Like, you mean like the Axis and Allies Axis? Yeah, it was Axis. No, it was.
Maybe that was, but that's not what they meant by it. But
no,
anyway.
I know. Should we jump on to the next story?
Anyway, I have links to the vulnerability announcement from the guys that discovered it and the official advisory from F5 that talks about fixing it and so on.
All right. So this next story was the one that we've been wanting to fit in, but it's been so crazy lately that we hadn't. But now we finally get a chance to talk about it. Now, I don't know all the details, Alan, but I know it involves ATI video card drivers, which I have, the Windows operating system, and being able to trigger a blue screen of death. So, right? Do I have it right so far? All right, what's going on?
All right, so Microsoft has a toolkit called EMET, E-M-E-T, which is the Enhanced Mitigation Experience Toolkit.
Oh, that rolls right off the tongue. It's beautiful.
Is a really weird name for it.
Yeah.
But anyway, it's basically an optional toolkit you install on your Windows machine, and it reduces the chance of an unknown vulnerability in Windows being successfully exploited. So basically, it's a mitigation toolkit against zero-day exploits.
So, okay.
You install it, and it basically lessens the chance that an exploit can successfully be used against you.
But it's not something that they just figure they would include in the operating system.
Well, it has the chance to make certain software not work, so it's not included by default.
This is what I just love about the Windows platform, because that's always been the case with antivirus too.
Right, but basically it's something you probably should have on a server, but you probably don't need on your desktop.
There you go.
Probably, if you're serious about security, you should probably get it anyway.
Yeah.
But basically, EMET relies on DEP, which is Data Execution Prevention, which is a extension to the CPU instruction set that says this area of memory is only for data, so don't ever run code if it gets in there. And this is basically designed to prevent buffer overflow attacks, which were extremely popular like 10 years ago.
Yeah.
Right? Like Code Red and so on. They were just huge, like exploits like every single day. It was huge. So DEP prevents areas of memory that have been marked as only storing data from ever being executed.
Okay.
The other one is ASLR, which is Address Space Layout Randomization.
Yeah.
So this is basically storing blocks of memory in randomized places so that if there's an overflow, you can't control what the data overflows into. which makes it much harder to actually do an exploit where you're overwriting. Basically, if you have like an area of data and then an area of code afterwards, if you overflow that data, the data area, you can then write into the code area, which is then going to get executed, right? By randomizing the location of those two, you make sure that you can't do that reliably.
Right, yeah.
And so this prevents buffer overflows and rote code execution and so on. So EMET includes an option to force DEP and ASLR on system-wide. By default, they're only on for applications that opt in because there could be compatibility issues. So this allows you to basically force it to be on for every program, even programs that don't know what it is. And that provides you better protection. Although, there's a chance that certain software won't work with it. In particular, ASLR breaks AMD and ATI video card drivers.
There we go.
Basically causing them to instantly blue screen your system. So that means basically if you have an AMD or ATI video card, you cannot use this advanced or enhanced mitigation experience toolkit. And so you can't.
So you wouldn't even know. If you could just have your ATI drivers installed, be rocking along, having a great old time playing your video games, and then you load this EMT, or EMET, sorry, and your machine just starts crashing. Is that what happens?
Basically.
That's a bunch of balls.
Yeah. So basically, if you have an AMD card, then you can't enhance the security of your Windows system.
So this is really a failing on AMD/ATI's part. Because they haven't modernized their driver or whatever the case is. Yeah,
basically their driver assumes the memory space will be all contiguous, and so it breaks when there's ASLR.
Yeah. Right. Well,
CERT has a vulnerability note out that describes, what's vulnerable and what's not. And so basically, if you use Intel or NVIDIA graphics drivers, you can lock down your system more, but if you use AMD, then that's not an option because your system will just crash.
Well, now I got all these ATI cards because of doggone Bitcoin. So, no, I'm kidding. I don't Bitcoin mine anymore. But I do actually have more ATI cards than I do NVIDIA cards. And I've never ran into an issue like this because I've never tried to enable this.
NVIDIA, so I'll be okay.
Yeah.
But I had never actually heard of this kit before.
Right.
It's like if I had any Windows servers, I would install this on it, though.
I guess so, yeah. The question I would have is, would you even be very likely to have an ATI video card on a server? You know what I mean?
A lot of server motherboards include a 16 megabyte ATI
embedded Radeon kind of thing.
90, like an expert video card. Yeah.
Yeah.
Although a lot of them have some strange video cards. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
It's like and on a server, depending what type it is, you might not install drivers at all.
Also, you got to figure there's like government contractor workstations and things like that where you'd want them to be as locked down as possible, as you'd want to be able to use this kind of thing.
You'd want this basically on any office machine, if you could. I don't know what other applications it might conflict with. I don't know how well supported it is. But if like the secretary at RSA had this, maybe that Flash exploit wouldn't have worked and their security tokens wouldn't have been compromised.
True enough. Now, do you know if like the drivers, how in Windows Update you can install the Windows hardware, certified drivers, quality certified. Do those also suffer from the same issue?
I think the AMD ATI drivers might. I don't know.
It says here that they go back to even before. Yeah, the issue goes from all the way from when it was just ATI to when AMD bought them. So it goes back for a while. I mean, that just blows my mind because then some of the responsibility lies on Microsoft too, because that hardware certification program is supposed to sort of flush all that stuff out.
Right, but again, that's testing against the Windows default configuration, which doesn't include EMET.
Oh, right. This is an add-on thing.
It's an optional add-on.
And this is why Microsoft decided to do it that way.
So basically, when you force the AMD drivers to use ASLR, which they don't opt into, it breaks.
See, this is one of the things
it's not really anybody's fault, but it should be addressed.
This is one of the things that I think Microsoft does really well. I think they do walk a pretty good line to the failing of their success in the consumer area as much as they'd like, but they walk a pretty good line between moving the platform forward and not screwing over like the 20 years of Windows software that runs on it. And every now and then they make these leaps that they have to kind of do it for security reasons or whatever.
I don't have the link handy, but there was just a post that I meant to put in the roundup. We'll put it in the roundup later. Visual Basic 6, which came out in 1998, is still very popular, and the apps will still be supported in Windows 8.
Right. So that will make that because that came out.
It'll be like 16 years later, and they'll still be supported. So basically, Visual Basic 6 apps will be supported for 20 years, basically.
So, and I think that's been a huge part of the reason why it's been a success in business. I know I don't think I've ever had a client that hasn't had some old app on some old Windows system that they're still running, that they've cobbled together to run on XP, and now they're cobbling together to run on 7. And
I remember working at the power plant trying to get some old application that ran on Windows NT4 to run on Windows 2000. And then, basically, it was a DOS app that got moved to Windows NT, which then had to be moved to 2000, which then had to be moved to 2003 and 2008.
And now it's just the new version of that going forward at some point is going to be virtualization. You'll have modern systems, like we were just in the chat room, we were having a little chat about the NX bit, because you mentioned how the no execution takes advantage of supporting the CPU, just like sort of the virtualization support of the NX code in there does. And I think in the future you'll have very low-level virtualized like Windows runtime environments just running on that to run this software. Sort of like you're starting to see the Windows XP mode in Windows 7.
Yep. The thing I was going to mention, back for the MySQL exploit thing. Some people doing tests in virtual machines have found that they're not vulnerable, and it's because the virtual machine usually doesn't expose the SSE4 instruction.
Oh, right, because it's pretty new.
And so basically you can end up with a virtual machine that running a version of the OS that says it's not vulnerable or isn't vulnerable, but if you were running it on real hardware, it would be vulnerable.
I wonder how many other things like that might be different because of the virtualized nature of the hardware, because it's that's interesting. That could be a fascinating difference to look into. All right, Alan, well, any other thoughts?
That's about it for that one.
All right. Well, then why don't we take a break and say thank you to the fine folks over at GoDaddy.com. Now, GoDaddy.com rocks the support of TechSNAP every single week, and we thank them very much for doing that. And they've been offering a great promo, and we've got a new one for you folks out there. If you want to make a statement, it is the summertime, and sometimes you just want to let your freak flag fly, and you want to buy a .us domain for a crazy good price, GoDaddy has given us a code where you can get a .us if you buy it for a year for $3.99. Normally, that's $19.99. So if you've been doing something, or you want to do a cool play on words that end in .us, go get that sucker for $3.99. Use our code $3.99 US4. $3.99 US4 when you check out to get a .us domain for $3.99. That is a huge savings, down from $19.99. So thank you to GoDaddy for supporting TechSNAP, and I want to see you guys do something great. We've already seen some great submissions for making a website on Alan's face, right, Alan?
Grr.
I don't think Alan likes it that much. So now, if you could do something like Alan is famous or something, or Alan's face is Butamus, something that ends in .us. I don't really know. It's up to you guys. Use the code $3.99 US4 when you check out to get that crazy great deal. And thank you to GoDaddy.com for sponsoring this week's episode of TechSNAP and paying the bills to keep the lights on so we can keep bringing this fine programming to you. All right, Alan. Well, with all that done, I think it's time we move on to the TechSNAP feedback. Thanks for sending your feedback into the show, either through the Contact Us forum or the email techsnap@jupiterbroadcasting.com. We've got a few emails this week. Alan, are you ready for the first one?
Yep.
All right, sir. It comes from Jason, and he writes, on a recent TechSNAP, you briefly mentioned how you use CNAME records to point to a subdomain. I'm hosting, and for years, I have had a problem of customers controlling their domains. We talked a little bit about that recently.
Mm-hmm.
We have set the A records to point to the IP, but this leaves us dead in the water when a server has an issue. In some cases, I've had to explain to an irate customer why we need to change their IP at all. After explaining the concept of high availability, they usually just argue more about why it shouldn't change. Don't get me started about change management either. What I would prefer to do is tell my customers to point to a CNAME somewhere and have that location be changeable on my end. I've had this work in the past for one customer, but I'm gun-shy to pull it off because I don't know how it affects things like SEO. Can you explain how you manage your domains with CNAMEs and if it has any downsides at all. Thanks, Jason.
Right. So at Scale Engine, we do this with subdomains all the time, right? Like we make something like cdn.jupiterbroadcasting.com is a CNAME to, some long host name at Scale Engine.
Right.
And that way we can control what servers your stuff points to. And we use a global server load balancer, DNS, and all kinds of crazy stuff. And it allows us to change things without having to make you make any changes. The problem with doing that for a whole domain is a number of restrictions on the way DNS works. The very biggest problem is that any resource record for which you define a CNAME cannot have any other record types defined, except for DNSSEC, but that's a different issue.
So that's a limitation.
Right. So what that means is if you say CNAME the root of example.com over to server1.scaleengine.com so that you can change the IP of what server that goes to at any time, that works, except you can't define an MX record for example.com anymore because you have that CNAME record. So that means you can't have email at example.com.
Right.
And so that's why you don't see that very often. Sometimes you'll see a CNAME for www going to somewhere, but the root of the domain, basically you can't have a CNAME if you're going to have any other records. Also, like you'd normally have a TXT record for the root of your domain for your SPF records, for your mail filtering and stuff.
Sure.
And there's a bunch of other records you might have. Also, I think you have NS records for the root of your domain. So you wouldn't be able to use a CNAME on the root of a domain. So you can have www CNAME to the root of the domain, but you can't have the root of the domain CNAME to somewhere because then you can't define NS records and so on and so on. So because of that, that's why you don't see that being used. So basically there you have two options. You either have the customers give you control of the domain in some way. This is where the GoDaddy account executive thing comes in really handy. It allows the customer to still be responsible for buying and renewing their domain, but allows them to give you access to change the IP address.
Right, which means they still do all the payment info, which is nice. So you don't have to worry about using your credit card.
Yeah, and you can also just have, if they use your name servers, which is what my customers do, right? They set the name servers to our servers. It's like what Chris does with like Jupiter Colony and stuff. When they use my name servers, I can go into the domain records and edit them myself. So I can just do a bulk search replace when I needed to change.
That's really, I think, the most comprehensive way for a host provider to do it.
Most web hosts do it. Is that so now it's only when you need to change the name servers that it gets more complicated.
Yeah.
We just assign a set of 4 and make the customer use them all. That way, the chances of all 4 needing to change is pretty low. So yeah. The best way is to have them delegate DNS control to you, which doesn't require them to do anything at GoDaddy other than like log in and set the name servers. And they do that once and you're done. Rather than have them pointing the IP records manually. Because most people that have hosting, like if they have somewhere other than GoDaddy, they probably don't get free DNS hosting anyway. And so then they'd be like, well, I need a name server somewhere. So if you just have them delegate DNS control to you, then you control it. And most control panels like cPanel and DirectAdmin provide a web-based thing for them to manage any other domains they might need. And then you can still have access to the raw files to do bulk. I wrote a nice couple of Perl one-liners to change all the MX records when we added more Spam Assassin servers and things like that.
Right.
But yeah, the CNAME doesn't really work in that state. The other option is for the failover type scenario there is to use something like DNS Made Easy, where we talked about before. With the automatic failover. But that requires having a second server on standby ready to go instantly rather than your typical
We'll spin up a new server, move and point things to that new server, stuff like that. Yeah.
Another option, obviously, is to use some kind of IP-based high availability where the same IP ends up on the new machine that has all the stuff.
You could do something too, where their IP points to some sort of front-end box that then you point to the server that's hosted behind it. Yeah.
Right.
All right, should we do the next question?
Yep.
All right, the next question came from Mario, and I believe he said he was from Austria. He says, hi all, he's been watching since episode 1, which is awesome.
62 weeks ago now.
62 weeks ago, yeah. Last episode, you talked about the healthy market for exploits and the recent hack of an exploit broker resulting in potential rise of threats, i.e. drive-by infections, spreading through shady ad networks, etc. This made me think about doing something about that on a firewall router level, in part because I increasingly use mobile devices, iOS and Android. where I can't just install ad block or no script on them. That's a good point. I hadn't really thought about that. He goes on to say that I'm now running pfSense on my home network after you mentioned it frequently on TechSNAP and LAS, which we have. And doing some research, I see two options. Use PF Blocker to block IP addresses, including entire country, so it's presumably also the entire ad network range, if he knew what they were. Or use something like SquidGuard to block at the subdomain level. Which of these solutions, if any would you think would make sense to implement? And most importantly, which block list would you recommend I use? Thanks again for the great work you do, Mario. What do you think, Alan?
I talked about this a little bit before, and it's actually the one of the assignments in the Unix security class I used to teach that was developed by Stefan Conter, my business partner. If you use the SquidGuard, like he was talking about, which is basically a slightly easier version than the manual version I was talking about, you can block subdomains. And basically what we did was import the list of ad-serving subdomains from AdBlock. So he's like, I can't install AdBlock on whichever browser in my Android phone. How can I stop the ads? But if you import the block list from AdBlock into SquidGuard on your firewall, any machine accessing the internet from behind your firewall would then have those ads blocked.
Yeah. I have another solution. Do you want me to share mine, or do you have another one?
Go ahead.
Okay. I have done this before for clients and for myself at a DNS level using a service like OpenDNS, because if you sign up with OpenDNS, they specifically have a filtering mechanism you can use that lets you filter out adware and known malware sites. That they keep a very curated, constantly up-to-date list for you automatically. And so what you do is you set your router or you set your workstations to use OpenDNS. You sign up and you register your external IP with them, and then it'll just take care of it for you at a DNS level, and that stuff just doesn't resolve at that point.
Yeah.
And that's a nice way to do it.
And basically, when you're forcing all traffic to go through Squid and using SquidBlock, you're basically doing the same thing, except for it's with a proxy. Yeah.
And now, see, the difference there would be you could, if you wanted to, take advantage of caching with Squid and stuff like that, which that'd be nice. Whereas with OpenDNS, it's just the request. Although OpenDNS has the upside of also being a fairly fast DNS resolution service too, which is kind of nice. All right. Well, why don't we talk about this email that was sent in by Ivan, I think, or what do you think there, Alan? You got a shot.
I don't know if it's Ivan or what.
Ivan, but he writes in to say the game company is currently handling their security breach for their League of Legends game is doing it very well. He thought, right? Isn't that essentially the gist?
So
of
basically, they have a forum post here which describes what happened, what they're doing about it, what they're planning to do, and it's fairly transparent and detailed.
They've listed out their actions they've taken in the last 24 hours, what their investigations have found, what they're going to continue to do. They also, they clearly defined what the scope was, what the hackers gained access to.
Right. This is basically the opposite of what we saw from Blizzard, which was like, what problem? There is no problem.
Right. And really, maybe this is, a little closer to what Cryptic Studios should have done. Yeah, because Cryptic Studios initially kind of rolled it out as we're upgrading security, reset your password. And then they kind of said, if you want more information, click here. And then when you clicked here, that was we've been hacked.
It was a press release with no details.
Yeah.
Basically.
So the details,
is actually some details.
Why the details are important is because informed consumers that understand what these things mean are then able to make informed decisions about continuing to do business there or what actions they need to take on their part.
Yep.
And also, I just want to point out that we've covered a lot of stories recently about password databases being leaked. If you haven't watched my password about using LastPass, go over to Jupiter Broadcasting, watch my in-depth look on that. It's time you guys start using every site you use needs to have its own unique password. And if you can manage it with your noggin, like I think Alan does, then more power to you. But if you're like me, you need LastPass to pull that off. All right, Alan. Well, that's our last email this week.
I just had a note about that. They were talking about. They made a good point that while they used hashing on their passwords, some people's passwords were weak enough that when they spent a little time trying, they managed to crack some of the passwords. And so that just because the password's a hash, you shouldn't assume that they're fine. You should change your password anyway.
Right.
Now, they also kind of off the cuff, they noticed that, by looking at their list of hash passwords, they found that 10,000 users had the same password.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
There were a lot of users that had at least one other person using the same password.
So, 10,000 of the users basically had the same passwords, right? Is that what it was?
Right, which is probably like League of Legends or something. And that, there were a lot of people that maybe only one or two other people, but not your password wasn't unique. They probably didn't realize it, but by just saying that, they basically let on that they weren't using salted hashes. They're using plain hashes like LinkedIn was.
Oh.
We just finished last week railing on LinkedIn about you don't want to just hash the password. You need cryptographic salted hashes with lots of loops.
We're not doctors. Like we said this. Alan does not have any medical background, but he does play an internet doctor on the internet, and he always recommends that you salt your hash. All right, if you want to get...
they're not using salted hashes, and they should.
And that gives them a wag of the TechSNAP finger. If you want to send your thoughts in... Bad. You can use the Contact Us link at the top. There's just a little contact button, and then you click that, and it takes you to a form you can fill out. Or you can email techsnap@jupiterbroadcasting.com. Also, we're always checking the subreddit over at links.techsnap.tv. That's the TechSNAP subreddit where you can vote on stories or submit a question, and the community can comment on it, and we also see it as well. All right, Alan, with the feedback all done, I think that means it's time for the TechSNAP Roundup. Welcome to the TechSNAP Roundup. Yeah, that's what that crazy music means. Now, the Roundup are stories that didn't quite make it to the top of the show, but we still want to talk about them, and they're almost always exclusively supplied to the show through our direct connection to the TechSNAP subreddit over at links.techsnap.tv. And often we think these are links you should probably go check out on your own and do a little post-show reading if you like. All right, Alan, are you ready for the first Roundup story?
Yep.
All right, let's have a good chuckle at this one. From the fallout of the LinkedIn password leak, 10 or so of the worst passwords exposed by the LinkedIn hack. Number one here, I think, has got to be 12345, right?
Well, 12345 wasn't in the database because LinkedIn required you to use at least 6 characters.
Good.
But 123456,
no!
1234567, 1234678 were all in there.
I was just kidding.
Yeah. And some other funny ones, obviously password. But somebody was being smart and used the word strong password.
Oh, nice. Strong password's a good one. LinkedIn password was good, too.
I hate my job. I want a new job.
F
LinkedIn
my life.
blows.
No Obama. Some political passwords here.
Yeah.
LinkedIn blows. That's a funny one, huh? I think strong password, though, is my favorite.
Yes. If they stuck like a couple symbols in there, that wouldn't actually be that bad.
Yeah.
Except for now it's bad.
Yeah. So remember, use a different password everywhere you go, and use better passwords than that.
Yep.
Now, there's also kind of a companion story here we have called Lessons Learned from Cracking 2 Million LinkedIn Passwords.
Right. So basically, somebody started out with the that 120 megabyte zip and started cracking and just looking what they could find. So they did some brute forcing until the rate they were finding new passwords went down. So once they were getting into the passwords that were long enough that it was an issue, then they switched to doing some old dictionaries.
Uh-huh.
Now, a lot of those old dictionaries were missing a lot of modern words like LinkedIn and stuff. And then they got smart. They were using John the Ripper, which has a built-in mode where it takes your dictionary and starts doing common transforms on it, like adding the word S to the end of every word. And, replacing the I's with ones or the L's with ones and all the different combinations like that.
Like the chat room's doing right now with strong password.
Exactly. So it basically systematically tries all those combinations. So after he had basically exhausted what was feasible with brute force in a short amount of time and what he could get from the dictionary, he took the list of all the passwords he had cracked so far and used that as a dictionary and started the attack again.
Very good.
And then the John the Ripper algorithm modified all those words and found even more passwords. And he basically kept repeating until he stopped getting more results.
That's pretty clever, and the thing that the tools that he's using are commonly available now. These aren't tools that are almost impossible to get your hand on. That's what's so incredible about it, is that almost anybody that just does a little bit of studying could go grab that database off the internet and go do this stuff. And
so basically, he also just ran an iteration with a dictionary of just the word LinkedIn. Yeah. So on the first iteration, it found 558 passwords that were somehow related to the word LinkedIn.
All right, people, don't do that.
Did a second iteration on that and found another 3,248 passwords that had basically 2 modifications from the word LinkedIn.
Yeah, of course.
The third iteration was another 1,733 passwords, and then 539 more, 217 more, 119 more, and then 40 more, and so on and so on.
All right, should we go on to the next story?
So yeah, some of the examples were like
No, all right.
LSW4 LinkedIn.
Yeah, chat room's coming up with all kinds of different great variations too, which I'm sure many of them are probably dead on. So don't use the website's name in your password, people.
Like PWD for LinkedIn, obviously is your password for LinkedIn, and
Yeah. All right. I want to talk about this next story on the roundup. It is a follow-up to the Flame virus. And when the Flame virus came out, I was on Unfilter speculating that, man, this sounds like another U.S.-Israel co-op thing, just like we know Stuxnet was. And that hasn't been confirmed, but it's close to confirmed. Kaspersky Labs, and there's a great write-up over on Wired's threat level blog, has gone through and identified parts of the code that appear to be nearly identical to Stuxnet. Early indications they didn't think they were, but they've actually found a module in the Stuxnet code that's nearly identical to a module code that's in Flame. And it suggests that separate teams created Flame and Stuxnet but shared the same source code at the beginning because they used a lot of common exploits sort of at the base level. They go on to say, according to this guy at Kaspersky, it obviously shows that these teams were somewhat tight to say. They were actually comfortable giving the source code to someone else, and then they would, then the teams obviously separated at some point. The researchers believe that the creators used part of Flame in the early stage of developing Stuxnet, perhaps because they were under a tight timetable to get Stuxnet launched, and Flame was developed before Stuxnet. So, they say the indications are there was initial collaboration, and then the projects forked at some point. Pretty interesting stuff, huh? That's a full-on cyber warfare weapon. And now what's interesting is they're keeping some of these bits of code, right? So they're building like attack code platforms. So now they have, we'll take these components of Flamer and we'll build Stuxnet on top of that and we'll deploy that. And now if we need something to do this,
some parts are questions. Are some of these modules just commodity things that anybody can get?
Maybe, right? Maybe. Could be. All right. Well,
a lot of like non-government malware is built the same way because the malware community sells modules and stuff to less sophisticated programmers.
Oh, yeah. Now, did you see the story that hit our subreddit earlier this week about Discover Card and potentially having unencrypted password database? I do not like the sound of this. But this is over at techflock.com, and they're doing some sniffing around, and they've been led to the conclusion that the username and password database that Discover Card users to log in and manage their Discover Card account is using clear text in the background. And you can do things, and I've actually seen this. You can go and request to have your Discover Card password reset or have them just remind you what it is, and they will email you, and you get an email with the password in the email. You can also ask their live chat reps for your password, and they will give you your password in the chat. They don't even have to reset it. They can just give it to you. Which would seem to me also, just kind of based on what we've talked about on the show, would also probably indicate that they at least in some way can pull out what these passwords are. What do you think, Alan?
It almost definitely means that they're storing your password in plain text, and that is horrible and shocking and against the PCI DSS credit card industry payment solutions security thing.
It is definitely against the standards because you specifically have to encrypt customer information like that.
Yeah.
Wow.
Password should be cryptographically hashed with salts using a proper cryptographic algorithm.
The only solution, I think, to all of our problems is to get all of the sysadmins in the world watching TechSNAP. That would solve it. Then these kinds of things wouldn't happen.
Programmers that are the problem, not sysadmins.
True. Boy, great point, Alan. Great point. Let's just take a moment to acknowledge what a great point that was. All right. So moving on, some news that Skype users are not going to be too happy about. Microsoft will be introducing ads to Skype audio calls. Now, these are silent ads, but they'll come up alongside the caller on Skype for Windows, and they're conversation starters, according to Microsoft, that will get you talking with your Skype mate about the ad.
About how bad and stupid the ads are.
Yeah, now if you are a Skype, if you have Skype credits or you have like a Skype in number, I guess, you're not going to get these ads. And if you use Skype on another platform.
If you keep $1 in your Skype account balance, you're okay?
I think so.
Because I have like 78 cents, so I'm good.
I don't know, I guess. What do you think? I mean, this is just what's going to be what happens, right? And as long as they're silent and not in video, because we do video calls.
Yeah,
that's what I care about. While we're talking about Microsoft, why don't we mention the fact that they have released a series of updates, but one of the more serious ones, especially for you server admins,
is MS12-036, which is a patch for RDP, a flaw that can allow remote code execution and denial of service attacks. It's not quite as bad as the one we talked about earlier this year, and there's no known exploit in the wild because it was a privately disclosed vulnerability, but patch your shit.
Right. And especially if you have RDP open to the world, I've gone into places and they just have every server has RDP open to the world. They just rev which port it runs on. For those of you looking for love, also some bad news for the users of the eHarmony site. I guess eHarmony suffered a username and password database compromise.
Yes,
what do we know about this?
The same day, I think, as LinkedIn, but
right.
There wasn't very much detail, and I hoped for more, although no more really came out. So it got relegated to the roundup the week after.
But if you are a eHarmony user, do consider going and updating your password. Go do it. eHarmony posted a blog update where they kind of just said, create a strong password, use at least 8 characters.
You should use at least 11 characters. 8 is not enough.
Create different passwords each site you use.
8 was enough in the year 2000.
I was gonna say, yeah, what, 99, 2000? Yeah.
8. The number 8 really only came from the fact that people used to use DES, which only used the first 8 characters of your password, and just ignored the rest.
Right. It's also another, not to keep harping on this, but if you use LastPass, you can just if LastPass is managing the passwords for you, you can just do crazy long passwords. You don't have to worry about it.
And if the site breaks when you use a really long password, another indication they're not properly hashing your password.
Aha. It's a good check, too. Now, something you teased at sort of towards the top of the show when we were talking about Microsoft keeping things alive for a long time. Here's the official Slashdot article on Visual Basic number 6.
Yes, Visual Basic 6, which came out in 1998, is still actively used by a lot of people and will be supported for the entire lifetime of Windows 8, which guarantees that the lifespan of VB6 will extend for at least 24 years from its release in 1998.
Wow, geez. What's funny is VB6 has just been it's a huge hit for them.
Well, basically, after VB6, when they went to .NET, it went back to where you had to be a real programmer to write the programs. In VB6, there were business analysts and accountants that would write programs.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. VB6 was really something.
VB6 would probably last even longer if they had done an update to it to address, 64-bit or dealing with files larger than 2 gigabytes.
Right.
I was trying to write something small and quick in VB6 one time not that long ago. Yes, it was 5 years ago now. A UDP file transfer system I was going to use a UDP broadcast to transfer a file to a bunch of machines at once.
Yeah.
I ended up finding a multicast FTP client that was much better, but basically it broke if the file was over 2 gigabytes because it only supported up to 32-bit numbers, and it would just wrap.
That's funny. That's funny.
And so the Windows File API for the old VB, the one VB6 had access to, could only deal with files up to 2 gigabytes, which was fine because you couldn't create a file bigger than that on a FAT32 file system anyway.
Well, while we're talking about development, Alan, I would be remiss not to mention that last week Jupiter Broadcasting launched a brand new show called Coder Radio over at Jupiter Broadcasting. It comes out every Tuesday morning. It's actually recorded live Mondays at 9 a.m. Pacific. And Coder Radio is all about software development. It's a weekly talk show where we take a pragmatic look at the art of software development and the business behind it, talk about experiencing our, the different challenges that we have as independent contract developers and things like that. Also, last week we covered a few beginner tool sets because I'm kind of thinking about starting development on, this is going to be a slow process because I'm a newbie, but starting a Jupiter Broadcasting app for Android and iPhone. So that, might happen over the course of Coder Radio. So go check that out over at jupiterbroadcasting.com. Alan, I think that's the whole show right there.
Yep.
Now, is there anything you want to cover before we roll out of here?
No, that's about it.
Okay.
Tune in next week.
Tune in next week. Yeah, now, one thing to note is I'll probably be transitioning the BitTorrent feeds over to bitlove.org. Have you heard of bitlove.org?
No.
Oh, it's sweet. So what bitlove.org does is they totally automate the BitTorrenting process based on the RSS feeds for the video files. So I give them the TechSNAP HD feed and the TechSNAP mobile feed, and then they create a torrent and a tracker for it, and they also set it up with the web seeding. So they web seed from the file that's in RSS, so, the file on the Scale Engine CDN.
They download the file from the CDN?
No, they just set up a web seed kind of like I do. So when the user gets the torrent,
the .torrent files?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
It's called bitlove.org, and I've put some of the Jupiter Broadcasting shows on there right now, and I think I'll be transitioning more of our shows over there. Like, here you go. Here's an example. Here's the faux show. So see, it's created entries for both the mobile and the HD version, and those are just based on the two RSS feeds that I have for that. And it's really cool, and I don't have to do anything. So we'll probably we'll probably by the next episode have new feeds for you guys to subscribe to for that. So we'll give you a week's heads up on that. So consider yourself warned and expect probably the transition in the next episode. All right, Alan. Well, I think that just about wraps up this week's episode of TechSNAP. Thanks for a great show, sir.
That is the greatest joke ever.
What's that?
Someone told me a UDP joke the other day, but I didn't get it.
Ba-dum-bump. Ba-dum-bump. Well, see, there you go.
That is awesome.
That's a note to end on. All right, everyone. Well, thank you for tuning into this week's episode of TechSNAP, and we'll see you right back here next week.